Aptitude and ability tests are designed to assess your logical reasoning or thinking performance. They consist of multiple choice questions and are administered under exam conditions. They are strictly timed, and a typical test might allow 30 minutes for 30 or so questions. Your test result will be compared to that of a control group so that judgments can be made about your abilities. You may be asked to answer the questions either on paper or online. The advantages of online testing include immediate availability of results and the fact that the test can be taken at employment agency premises or even at home. This makes online testing particularly suitable for initial screening, as it is obviously very cost effective. Aptitude and ability tests can be classified as speed tests or power tests. In speed tests, the questions are relatively straightforward and the test is concerned with how many questions you can answer correctly in the allotted time. Speed tests tend to be used in selection at the administrative and clerical level. A power test, on the other hand, will present a smaller number of more complex questions. Power tests tend to be more at a professional or managerial level. First things first. The first thing to do is to determine which type of questions you are going to be asked. Don't waste time practicing questions that won't appear in the actual test. Types of questions can be classified as follows. Mechanical reasoning tests measure your knowledge of straightforward mechanical and physical concepts. They do not measure your underlying mechanical aptitude in the same way that abstract reasoning questions measure your underlying intellectual ability. For example, you could sit an abstract reasoning test without having seen one before and still get a reasonable score. The same is not true of mechanical reasoning, where your score will depend significantly on your knowledge of levers, pulleys, gears, springs, simple electrical circuits, tools, and shop arithmetic. You may have come across these in elementary science, and the questions on these topics are fairly straightforward. If elementary science classes seem like a long time ago and you need to refresh your memory, then read Mechanical Reasoning Tests, What You Need to Know, before you attempt these practical tests. If you are taking a test as part of the selection for a craft or apprenticeship job, then you may be asked some questions about tools and how they are used. These questions are again straightforward, and if you have significant time fixing or making things, they won't present any problems. These tests usually involve grammar, verbal analogies, and following detailed written instructions. They can also include spelling, sentence completion, and comprehension. Because they depend on understanding the precise meaning of words, idioms, and the structure of the language, they discriminate very heavily towards native speakers of the language in which the tests have been developed. If you speak English as a second language, even if this is at a high standard, you will be significantly disadvantaged. You usually find questions on all of the following: spelling, grammar, sentence completion, analogies, word groups, instructions, critical reasonings, and verbal deductions. These tests are widely used since most jobs require you either to understand and make decisions based on verbal or written information, or to pass this type of information to others. In practice, the more straightforward types of questions, spelling, grammar, and instructions, tend to be more applicable to administrative roles, and the reasoning and deduction type of questions to management roles. Spelling questions. Questions where you have to identify incorrectly spelt words are common in all levels of verbal ability tests. The test designer needs to choose words which are fairly common and in regular usage, but which are often spelled incorrectly. There will be little point in using obscure words which only a small percentage of candidates could be expected to know. This means that you will almost certainly have heard of the word and know its meaning. This requirement to use words which are in everyday use but which are commonly misspelled means that the test designer has a relatively restricted list of words to choose from. In most cases, the longer that you have been out of the education system, the more your spelling will have deteriorated. Most people now use word processors with inbuilt spell checking software, and it is very easy to forget how words are spelled, as we don't physically write them down and often rely on the software to correct them for us. Many people find it quite embarrassing when they realize how much their spelling has deteriorated. This is one area where remedial action is straightforward and is guaranteed to produce positive results. Missing word questions. These questions are designed to measure your vocabulary, specifically your understanding of precise word meanings. You will usually be offered a choice of 4 or 5 words, in any of which could complete a sentence. These questions are relatively straightforward, but because more than one of the options will complete a sentence satisfactorily, you must read it carefully and choose the best word. Spatial ability can be defined as the ability to interpret and make drawings from mental images and visualize movement or change in those images. Spatial ability tests measure your ability to manipulate shapes in 2 dimensions or to visualize 3-dimensional objects presented as 2-dimensional pictures. These tests are usually of 20 to 40 minutes duration and contain 20 to 30 questions. Spatial ability tests often involve the visual assembly and the assembly of objects that have been rotated or which are viewed from different angles, or objects that have different markings on their surfaces. Spatial ability, shape matching. In these types of questions you will be presented with a number of objects, only 2 of which are identical. These are speed questions and you will need to work quickly and attempt to answer as many as possible in a given time. Generally speaking, if the questions involve the manipulation of 2-dimensional objects, then they are probably fairly straightforward, but you will be challenged to answer them all in the time you are given. Spatial ability, cube views in 3 dimensions. These questions show you several, usually 3 views of a 3-dimensional cube with unique symbols or markings on each face, and then ask you a question about it. For example, which symbol is on the opposite face. Spatial ability, other solids in 2 and 3 dimensions. These questions are similar to the cube questions above, but rather than cubes they use other solid shapes which may be irregular. In some respects, these questions are easier than the cube questions as there are more relationships to work with. In other words, each face of the solid shape has a shape of its own rather than just being square. Spatial ability, maps and plans. These questions often appear in tests for emergency services, military and law enforcement jobs, where the ability to give or follow directions based on a map or street plan is essential. All spatial ability tests rely on you to be able to imagine what would happen in your mind's eye. Unfortunately, about 5% of the adult population find it impossible to imagine 2-dimensional shapes being moved through a 3rd dimension. This is thought to be because there is a generic factor involved in a spatial reasoning ability. Spatial ability is required in production, technical and design jobs where plans and drawings are used. For example, engineering, architecture, surveying and design. However, it is also important in some branches of science where the ability to envisage the interactions of 3-dimensional components is essential. The first type of numerical ability test covers basic arithmetic such as addition, subtraction, multiplication and division, number sequences and simple mathematics such as percentages, powers, fractions, etc. This type of test can be categorized as a speed test and is used to determine your basic numeracy. Obviously, you will not be allowed to use a calculator. These questions are directly applicable to many administrative and clerical jobs but can also appear as a component of graduate and managerial tests. The speed at which you can answer these questions is a critical measure, as most people could achieve a very high score given a limited time in which to answer. You can therefore expect 20 to 35 questions in 20 to 30 minutes. Number sequences. These questions require you to find the missing number in a sequence of numbers. This missing number may be at the beginning or middle, but is usually at the end. These number sequences can be quite simple like the examples above. However, you will often see more complex questions where it is the interval between the numbers that is the key to the sequence. These number sequences usually consist of 4 visible numbers plus 1 missing number. This is because the test designer needs to produce a sequence into which only one number will fit. The need to avoid any ambiguity means that if the number sequence is reliant on a more complex pattern, then there will need to be more visible numbers, for example. To solve these number sequence questions efficiently, you should first check the relationship between the numbers themselves, looking for some simple arithmetic relationship. Then look at the intervals between the numbers and see if there is a relationship there. If not, and particularly if there are more than 4 numbers visible, then there may be 2 number questions interleaved. You will occasionally find multiplication, division, or powers used in these sequences, but test designers tend to avoid them as these operations soon lead to large numbers which are difficult to work out without a calculator. Letter of the alphabet as numbers. Another type of sequence question which appears in these tests involves the substitution of letters of the alphabet for numbers. For example, A equals 1, B equals 2, etc. It may seem strange to consider these as numerical reasoning questions, but they actually work in the same way once you have changed them back into numbers. Summary. Numerical ability tests can be divided into tests of simple numeracy, where you are told which arithmetic operations to apply, a numerical reasoning test where you are presented with some data and questions, but the methods required to answer the questions are not specified. In all cases, you need to prepare by practicing your mental arithmetic until you are both quick and confident. Your score in the simple speed test will be very much influenced by your ability to add, subtract, multiply, and divide quickly and accurately. Even though you will need to do few arithmetic operations in the reasoning test, there is no point in working out how to arrive at the answer if you make a simple mistake when calculating it. Although you are allowed to use the calculator for some questions, you should make a habit of mentally estimating your answers as a way of checking them. Numerical reasoning questions assess your ability to use numbers in a logical and rational way. The questions require a basic level of education in order to successfully complete, and are therefore measuring numerical ability rather than any educational achievement. The questions measure your understanding of such things as number series, numerical transformations, the relationships between numbers, and your ability to perform numerical calculation.